Like many people around the world during the COVID-19 pandemic and ensuing lockdown, I've tried to get the best out of my Disney Plus account by watching all 23 Marvel movies in the correct order. Now, while I'm doing this, I hit a level of meta nerd where I feel that, hey, you know what? Superheroes and the United States government actually have a lot in common, especially when it comes to the idea of separation of powers and checks and balances. So here are these two very important terms we need to know. We're going to do them superhero style, all right? Now, as I was watching all these movies, I'm trying to figure out, hey, what branch of government would each superhero be? And I figured that, Iron Man, he's got a lot of leadership, right? And he's very, forceful in his nature and that kind of stuff. He's definitely the executive branch, which is the president. You know what I mean? Okay, because he has that decision-making type thing where he can kind of enforce those ideas that come out, and that's their job, right? That's the executive branch's job, right? To kind of lead the country and enforce laws, make sure they take place. I think about who's going to be the judicial branch. That's going to be the courts, the ones who do the interpretation of laws, that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And so I'm thinking right away, you know what, judicial branch has got to be Thor. You know what I mean? Very level-headed, controls situations, and he has that pedigree to kind of help look at a situation from different points of views. Thinking, okay, who's gonna be our legislature? Who's our Congress? It's got to be Captain America. Number one, come on, he's Captain America, right? But he has the development of plans and kind of like puts those ideas together to make things happen. Then I started thinking about checks and balances. This idea that keeps our country equal. I'm very, Doctor Strange, because you know why? He's like that most powerful hero that yet nobody really seems to know about until, unless you're super into the whole Marvel scene. Now, the two topics we're thinking about here are separation of powers and checks and balances. These whole things come around because our founding fathers, our 18th century superheroes, if you will, had two big fears: absolute power and tyranny, something that seems like a lot of our superheroes tend to fight against as well. And so they developed these two ideas in our Constitution: the idea of separation of powers and checks and balances. Now, separation of powers was simply trying to separate the power of the United States government between three branches: legislative, executive, judicial, in which they have the legislative branch make the laws, the executive branch enforce the laws, judicial branch interpret the laws. This way, not one branch has too much power and has absolute control over the people, becoming a tyrant, much like a king or a dictator would. We also see the division of power between the federal and state government, some call federalism. That way the federal government doesn't get too powerful, and there are limits on our federal government. Now, within the federal government, we even see a set of checks and balances put together, almost like a fail-safe, if you will, to make sure that no one branch gets too powerful and takes over the whole government. And so there's ways that each government branch can kind of check and balance each other out through the different strengths and their jobs and their powers to limit the power of the other, make sure that no one branch gets too powerful. Now, going with my superhero analogy, I found there are a couple things that superheroes and the government have in common. Number one, they get their power from somewhere, okay? The government gets its power, number one, from the Constitution and from the people because they give them those powers. Whereas, superheroes get their power elsewhere, right? You may just be rich and really intelligent like Bruce Wayne or Tony Stark, becoming Batman, Iron Man, respectively. You might be a alien like Superman who has superpowers. You might get bit by radioactive spider, that kind of thing, right? And you get your power from somewhere. Also, think about all superheroes have their own special powers and their special abilities, much like our branch of government do. They have certain things that they do and that they have expertise in. They also have weaknesses. That means they can be checked by other branches, right? Superman, for example, has kryptonite, right, where he can't, function if that kryptonite's present. Batman has the fear of his death in his family, that kind of stuff. You have Iron Man, who has his hubris and his overconfidence sometimes, his weaknesses. And so they have weaknesses too, and so do our branch of government. But when you think about it, their goal is the same, right? They're going to work, protect citizens, help citizens, try and make life as best as possible, and sometimes they all work together, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes all three of our branches work together very, very well, and sometimes they fight against each other, like you maybe saw in Captain America Civil War. So let's talk about our separation of powers, right? Here are three branches that we have set up. Our legislative branch has to do certain jobs, like they basically write the laws, right? They write the laws. You guys are going to serve as that role here in government class at some point. They have to do other things like approve treaties. They get to decide where money goes, decide taxes, and they get to declare war. All those kind of things as their job. Whereas the executive branch here, our president, can propose laws and suggest laws, but they can't make them. They do get to administer the laws, though, which means they can make executive orders to tell people how to enforce the laws. While they can't make war, they do command the armed forces, and they get to say, hey, I'm going to send the military here or not send the military here. They get to appoint officials and ambassadors and advisors, but Congress has to approve them. They get to conduct the foreign policy and make the treaties, but the treaties have to be approved by Congress, by the Senate. You have the judicial branch, which gets to interpret the Constitution, the executive orders, all that kind of stuff, and possibly review those cases. Now, here's our big confusing system of checks and balances, and it looks like a lot of stuff. But really, it's just kind of set up so we can see how each group checks the other group, right? Let's, for example, look at Congress here. Congress can check the president by, number one, impeaching them if need be. If they feel that the president is not doing their job right, or if they feel that the president is breaking the laws, they can impeach the president, hold a trial, which we saw just earlier this year. The House of Representatives also controls the budget. The only group that can make a law that spends money is the House of Representatives. Nobody else can do that because they're closest to the people. We have the Senate, who can give advice and consent to the president. They ratify all the treaties and they confirm the appointments. And if the president does veto a bill, and if you've been in our full session, you've seen this happen, the Congress can then also override a veto. At the same time, the president can be like, hey, Congress, you're getting a little too big for your britches. If you're making laws that I don't agree with, I can veto that. If he wants to talk to Congress and says, hey, you guys got to get together and talk, he or she can call a special session. They can propose laws and say, hey, you guys got to do this and take care of this. And if you're a governor, like say Tony Evers, you can just do what's called a line item veto. We can only reject parts of the bill, and governors can do that in many, many states. At the same time, we see the judicial system, our Supreme Court, that can declare an executive order unconstitutional. You know what I mean? And so they make sure that, if the president makes an executive order, which is an order they make that kind of acts like a law, they can say, yeah, no, you can't do that. And we've seen this in the past with President Trump. He had a travel ban. They made that the court shot down. Also, if you go on the Supreme Court or you're a federal judge, you're appointed for life. That means you're appointed past the current president that appointed you. And so you're there forever. At the same time, the president gets to pick who he or she wants to appoint as a federal judge. And they can put people that they want on the court and keep them on there for their life. Also, they can do a pardon. A pardon is when the president basically, or a governor for that matter, can wipe somebody's crime off the record. And that way they make sure that the courts don't give poor decisions, or they can override a decision by the court. They can also commute sentences, which means that they basically release somebody from jail. And we've seen this happen both at the state level and at the federal level. At the same time, we have the judicial that can declare laws made by Congress unconstitutional. And they can say, hey, Congress, you're breaking the rules here. You're making laws that you can't make. And boom, wipe off the map. At the same time, Congress has to approve, the Senate has to approve all federal judges, make sure that the president's just not putting their friends and buddies on the court. And they can even establish a lower court and set how many judges are on those courts. So we see there's a very, very complicated system here. But the whole idea is to set it up so that each branch is going to be equal. Each of their superpowers, if you will, cancel out the other ones, make sure that they're all at the same level so they can all work together, or are supposed to work together, and make life better for the people. Check out your assignment, ladies and gentlemen. You're going to take this analogy a step further using your Constitution and the assignments you've done already on the Constitution to help analyze the idea of separation of powers and checks and balances. Thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best.